The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NFL Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in the NFL from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NFL Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NFL. You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast.
There were so many offseason changes and things that have happened that this last June was the most listened to June in the history of me doing the Locked On Steelers podcast, because y'all was tuning in like, Aaron Rodgers is here? What? They got Jalen Ramsey? What's going on here? Everything was going crazy, and then they could be making more moves. Who knows? But the point is, the Steelers have been making lots of moves. Omar Khan's been doing things. We've covered the they're not all in aspect of it. But it does show that the Steelers are trying to build. They are trying to reform, reshape, and they're trying to set something up. Now, that something, to a lot of people on the outside and in the national media with the bird's eye view, seems to be, they're loading up for this year. They're loading up because they just want one more crack at it, and then, maybe they'll blow everything up and Tomlin will be gone. And I don't think that's it at all. Because the Steelers don't do one-year runs. They don't do just one year wonders and hoping for the best. They set up for the future. And that's all that they've been doing. That's why they got rid of George Pickens, because they didn't see him part of the future that they wanted to build. That's why they brought in DK Metcalf, because they did see him as part of the future, and they signed him to big money. That's why they didn't sign Darius Slay to huge money, and they signed him to a one-year deal. That's why Rodgers is pretty much on a one-year deal. That's why a lot of these guys that they brought in who are, 34 and above, they're not going to be around for much more than this year, if anything more than this year at all. And that's why none of the moves that they've made have cost them any major capital, whether that be salary cap size or draft capital in the coming years, because the Omar Khan is setting it up so that they can have a core that's competitive, that goes after teams, that can set things up. And if the young players on this team rise up to join that core and to become a really talented roster, then that's going to set up the opportunity for, not only will they have these developed players and now the players that they've added in free agency and otherwise, like Ramsey, like Metcalf, who look like they'll be here more than just a year, probably 2, 3, maybe 4 years or 5 years for Metcalf, maybe 2, 3 years for Ramsey. But I think the reason they got those guys and brought them in is because if they hit on a lot of these younger guys we've been talking about, the offensive line, some of the younger playmakers that they have on the team on both sides of the ball, if those things line up, it sets the Steelers up with a really good chance to say, again, hey, 2026, we're projected to have 12 draft picks with our comp picks totaled up. We can be aggressive and just go get that quarterback. Because if we get the quarterback and we hit on quarterback and our defense is top 5 and our offense is top 13, top 14, that's a Super Bowl threat right there if you get the right quarterback. And that's what I think the Steelers are going to do. Now, I'm going to bang this drum until it don't happen or it does happen. You're going to see me banging this drum all season long, and I'm going to keep reminding you this is the plan. They stick to the plan, unless the only way this plan changes is if the quarterback draft class of 2026 goes bad. Because again, the plan was not in 2025. We said it ahead of time. If you were watching this show, I was one of the few people out there that was saying every day they're not getting Shedeur Sanders. They're not getting Shedeur Sanders. I don't care what anybody tells you. They're not getting Shedeur Sanders. Lo and behold, they didn't get Shedeur Sanders. So now they're setting up for 2026 to be the year. And we've talked about how the 2026 class could be that class. That is a group that is projected to have at least 6 guys that are big names. Arch Manning, of course, the next Manning descendant of that legendary quarterback family. Lenore Sellers, my personal favorite of the group. South Carolina, young athletic quarterback, can run, has a cannon on him, has to refine some of his throwing, but has a lot of talent to him. Garrett Nussmeier out of LSU, Cade Klubnik out of Clemson, Drew Allar at Penn State, and then there's Nico Iamaleava, who was with Tennessee, is now with UCLA, and there's that whole situation. But that's at least 6 names there that you look at and you say, okay, those are all reasonable guys that could be in the draft in 2026. And so one of the pushbacks that a lot of people have had to when I bring this up is like, Chris, there's gonna be other teams that want quarterbacks. The Steelers can't compete with it, especially if they do what they've been doing and they finish 10 wins, and then they have to pick in the low 20s instead of in the high teens. They can't go get one of these quarterbacks, and I keep pushing back. Yes, they can. They can trade up and get them, but I also think it's interesting because they might not have to trade up even in such a situation if this situation goes right. There was a really good question, and we're going to start taking calls. We're going to take a lot of calls this episode, but there's a really good question that was called into our call-in line. The call-in line, by the way, is 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. We'll be happy to answer your questions on the show. This one comes from Dean out in Prescott, Arizona, and it taps into something that a draft expert talked about last week when they did their full mock draft and where the Steelers went. But here's Dean from Arizona.
Hey, Chris, Dean from Prescott, Arizona. I was just calling about asking a question on for the quarterbacks of the draft next year, and it's always talked about trading up. But as you mentioned, there's like 4 or 5 quarterbacks that could be first-round draft picks next year. What are the chances that the Steelers don't have to trade up, and that one of those 4 or 5 quarterbacks will actually fall to them? Because they're always picking around 18 to 22. What are the chances of one of them just falling? And are all of these quarterbacks coming out next year relatively the same to where it doesn't matter? Whichever one falls to them is somebody that they're going to be happy with. It could be a franchise QB if they all pan out next year. Just like to know your thoughts on that. Love the show. Have a good one.
Thank you, Dean. As always, you can call in like Dean did at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. Dean, there is a chance the Steelers may not have to trade up. I think they will end up trading up. But if you're a person out there that says, "Oh, Chris, I know you're not digging in on this class that early, so you don't know for sure." I don't know for sure. Neither does anybody. But if you look at ESPN NFL draft expert Matt Miller, who does a lot of preliminary research, he does a lot of the hard, the hard scouting, and he tries to get fits from all the teams. He actually had the Steelers getting a quarterback without even trading up. He had the Steelers picking 16th in his mock draft, and they got LaNorris Sellers, quarterback out of South Carolina. Now, in his draft class, Arch Manning does not even come out. He has him going back to college for a year. His first quarterback off the board was Cade Klubnik out of Clemson, which that caught me off guard because I think Cade Klubnik's one of the guys that, like, I've seen Cade Klubnik play, and I like Cade Klubnik, but I haven't seen a lot of people say, "Oh yeah, he's definitely going to be a star in the NFL." But he has Cade Klubnik going number 1 overall to the Browns. And then the next quarterback that goes off the board is Garrett Nussmeier out of LSU, number 11 to the Colts in the draft. And then the Steelers get LaNorris Sellers out of South Carolina at 16. And again, if the Steelers are finishing, 10 wins or so, they're not going to be 16, but they could trade up to that point. They could trade up even higher. I still think that they have the full thing there. And also the last first round quarterback that Matt Miller had picked in the first round was Drew Aller going to Penn State, which is kind of crazy, going to the Rams from Penn State. But it's kind of interesting because, but I guess Matt Stafford's old enough. But in this situation, there's a scenario for the Steelers to not even have to trade up to go get a guy. Now, again, I don't think they finish in a place where they'd actually pick 16th this year, because again, that'd be middle of the road. That'd be like going 8-9 or so in the NFL. I just don't think the Steelers are going to do that this year. But even if they didn't, if they picked 23 or 24 or 22, whatever they pick, if they pick in the 20s, they can trade up and go get a guy like that. It's very attainable. And to finish the other part of your question, Dean, are all the quarterbacks in this draft class doable? Most likely not, because we've seen it before. There's times where, you go back to like one of the biggest examples where when people thought that Peyton Manning and Ryan Leaf were 1A and 1B, and if you draft one, the other one's also going to become a superstar. And of course, Peyton Manning went on to become one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Ryan Leaf had a lot of fixing his personal life to do after that. I say all that to say, I think the Steelers are just setting themselves up for it. They're going to watch and see how this year play out. They're going to see who are their preferred quarterback targets, who do they think they can win the most with, and then they're going to go get that guy. And I think they're going to put every resource they have into going and get that guy, because that is the plan. All these moves are great and nice and fun, and they'll be exciting to watch this year, the big trades and all the things they've done. But everything is being done while Omar Khan and his Steelers have their eye on that 2026 draft class, how those quarterbacks play out, and who they got to target and what they'll have to do to end up with one of those quarterbacks. That is the plan. Don't get it twisted. And again, might not take as much as you think to go get one of these quarterbacks. They might have a full draft class with this quarterback if they're able to get him. But again, go check out Matt Miller's latest mock draft. He did it last week for ESPN. We would have talked about it, but Steelers want to be crazy and make more trades.
Check your bank account and wonder where'd all my money go between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment. It's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing your money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay.
Jayden Daniels isn't just the reason the Commanders offense worked in 2024. He's the reason it's built to take over the league in 2025.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're going to break down why Jayden Daniels is the engine of this offense and how his growth, weapons, and playmaking shaped the Commanders' identity in 2024. All of that coming up today on Locked On Commanders, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create your account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Jayden Daniels was the Commanders' offense in 2024 in every single way, connected to everything that was happening. Every explosive play, every critical drive, every glimmer of hope started and ended with Jayden Daniels in 2024. The reason he was the NFL's Offensive Rookie of the Year and the reason there is so much excitement around the Washington Commanders in 2025. Of course, he's not going to do it on his own, but like I said, it's going to start with the quarterback. That's what we're going to do here this week. It's a week long of programming. So everydayers, you already come through all the time, but if you're not an everydayer, this week is going to be one of those weeks where if you can come through for every episode, we're going to break down where the offense and the defense are going by starting where they're coming from, a deep dive into what happened with the offense and the defense in 2024 before we take a look ahead at the end of the week to where they're potentially going, how some of these new players are going to fit into what the Commanders needed coming out of last season. So when we look back at the 2024 Commanders offense, again, the centerpiece of the whole thing, Jayden Daniels, from a passing aspect, arm strength, accuracy was there. That accuracy, especially in the intermediate part of the game, was some of the questions that people had about him in the pre-draft process. Explosive plays to Terry McLaurin became a very regular part of the offense. If you go back and you remember early in the season, the connection between Terry and Jayden, not as strong as everybody wanted it to be. Once it clicked, though, man, it clicked in a big old way. He was solid in the short game, solid in the intermediate throws, used his reliable targets like Zach Ertz on third downs in the red zone, as well as that kind of conglomeration of number two wide receivers throughout the season. And then as a rusher, he added that unpredictability in an offense that defenses hate. Defensive coordinators hate it. Linebackers hate it. All defenders just absolutely hate it. He can extend plays with his legs. He can run design plays. He can improvise on his own and create those second plays that Dan Quinn talks about all the time. And the biggest part of this is that the defense now has to account for him. It's no longer 11 on 10 when you have a quarterback like Jayden Daniels. It's truly 11 on 11 football, because if you don't account for Jayden Daniels, that is when Jayden Daniels is going to kill you with his athleticism. But then you also look at the leadership and the playmaking, right? When we talk about Jayden Daniels was central to the Commanders' offense and connected everything they're doing, that's where it really kind of meets the road, right? Is his leadership and playmaking ability, consistently being able to step up into the limelight, into the biggest moments, not crumble under the pressure, even as a rookie. Really outside that first game, I think that first game against Tampa Bay Buccaneers in week one, you saw a little bit of, I wouldn't even call it like rookie flustering, like just a little bit of nerves, or you kind of tell it was his first NFL game. You know, it was getting darker. It was a little bit, it wasn't a primetime game, but it was later in the day. Like just you kind of tell he was a first time NFL quarterback. And Cliff Kingsbury even talked about it after the game, kind of saying, look, he's in fight or flight mode right now because it's new. It's all new to him. The speed of the game is new at this level. So his fight is going to be flight, right? We're going to get out of the pocket and use that athleticism. But as the season wore on, right, consistently stepping up in those critical moments on those third downs, we saw him account for several third down conversions with his legs in the red zone, under pressure. Didn't really matter as the year wore on. That mentality that we got to know in training camp and before the games really counted of, not being shaken, being unflappable, all those things really showed up in a big way in the games. But he saw his areas for growth. And that is really kind of the most exciting thing, is that he can take another step forward into being a more well-rounded quarterback, cutting down on turnovers. Every quarterback is going to want to do that, of course. So Jaden Daniels is no different there. You want to cut down on turnovers as much as possible. Efficiency under pressure. Unfortunately, pressure just kind of became a reality last year. So you want to see him kind of take that growth step into not being affected by the pressure even as much as he was, which wasn't terrible by any means anyway. And then enhancing the pass protection. That's not really a Jaden Daniels thing as much as it is an organizational thing. Also, Tyler Biotish, the center, like where you can get better setting protections and just kind of understanding what defenses are trying to do against you and your quarterback. Obviously, that's going to help. So Jaden Daniels' dual threat ability made him the driving force of the Commanders' offense 2024. It's his potential to get even better that makes things even more exciting and makes him one of the more exciting quarterbacks to watch in 2025. But again, like I said, he's not doing it all on his own. The Commanders' rushing attack started off really great last year, fizzled off. Again, injuries, fatigue, a lot of that stuff just kind of playing in. But the cast is pretty much back, right? The boys are back in town. Brian Robinson Jr., your physical downhill runner, best in short yardage, red zone situations, can break a big one obviously here or there, but he's not really known for that breakaway speed. Austin Eckler, your veteran dual threat guy who can run, he can catch. He's a little bit more explosive than Brian Robinson Jr. Doesn't quite have the wheels that maybe he used to one time, just because he is a little bit older now. And then you got some other guys. Jeremy McNichols is in that mix. Chris Rodriguez Jr., who was out-touched by Jeremy McNichols, right? But when you look at him like one-to-one, Chris Rodriguez Jr. definitely more successful, had a 74.3% success rate on his touches compared to Jeremy McNichols, who had a 58.2% success rate. And then, of course, you have the young guy this year, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. We'll get more into how Ja'Cory fits into the future of the Commanders on a later episode this week. Of course, you got the receivers. Terry McLaurin's your number one guy, your deep threat, stretches the defense, threatens them short, intermediate, and deep, can run all the routes, do all the things that you need him to do. Zach Ertz, your number one tight end, your dependable veteran who excels in short, intermediate routes. Finding space in defense is just kind of his forte. And then your other guys. No longer with the team is De'Ami Brown and Olamide Zaccheaus. So they've got to find other people to provide those game-to-game advantages. Noah Brown is back for another season. Hopefully he escaped injury after being carted off the practice field. Luke McCaffrey's continuing to develop, and he's looked good so far early in the offseason program. And all of it, you hope, if you're Cliff Kingsbury and if you're Jaden Daniels even, is going to help you construct a balanced approach, right? Rushing attack was used well last year to set up play action opportunities to exploit those deeper areas of the field. The team did a good job overall of adapting when its strategy was tested or finding the weaknesses in their opponents in 2024, leaned into the rush to drain the clock like you typically would, pass to get those explosive plays when needed and when trailing. And the play styles really complement one another. You look in the backfield alone, Brian Robinson Jr.'s downhill style complements Austin Eckler's more versatile style. Terry McLaurin's more stretch the field style complements Zach Ertz's ability to find room underneath. And as you add more guys that can complement each other moving forward, the Commanders are going to continue to try to exploit those balances in their offense while providing Jaden Daniels even more options at every level of the field. And that kind of takes us to our key trends, right? Explosive plays. You knew this when Cliff Kingsbury was brought in as the offensive coordinator. Explosive plays were going to be a cornerstone of the offense, primarily with McLaurin. But last year, they also found them with De'Ami Brown at times. So you got to find a way to replace that production with De'Ami in Jacksonville. Adaptability was another key characteristic, leaning on versatility from guys like Eckler in several areas of the game, as well as Ertz's reliability, really helped them keep the chains moving, keep the ball going. And during that 3-game losing streak during 2024, we saw the kind of come into question of that adaptability. Then everything shook loose with the Titans. And really from that point on, you had the bye, then the Saints, and then the end of the regular season into the postseason. Everything kind of started to click a little bit. And then the comfort in relying on Jaden Daniels. Early on, it was all about how do we protect him? Is he sliding? Is he running smart? Is he doing all these things as the season wore on? Although you're always a little bit nervous watching Jaden run, I think, right? But as the season wore on, you certainly got more and more confident when you saw him decide to take off, that he was doing so smartly and with his own health, obviously, in mind. So some of the challenges and weaknesses that this offense is going to face, that they face in 2024, the offensive line struggling to protect Jaden consistently, especially against those elite fronts, pressure disrupting timing in key situations. No quarterback is immune to that kind of thing. And then struggling on third down consistency. Overall, third down percentage was pretty good, but they had some games ranging from 25% conversion to 64% conversion. You want to get that number over that 50% mark a lot more often than they did in 2024. Big plays, smart decisions make the Commanders' offense dangerous, but the way those moments are called and executed are the difference between the wins and the losses.
Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and even regular season games, you know, the dog days of summer in baseball, can feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started.
It's a stretch to say that Mazi Smith is the key for the Cowboys to have a successful season, but not by much.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is probably the one position that I feel maybe the worst about going into camp. And one of the main reasons why is the depth, but also this is a huge year for Mazi Smith. The Cowboys are counting on Mazi Smith to take a massive step forward here in year 3.
I mean, it's a lot of unknown. I mean, that's why, you know, we keep saying, I think people ask about grades. They always want to talk about grades and all that, but I think we keep giving an incomplete grade, right? Because it feels like even with Mazi Smith, you know, this is really kind of the first year that he's, you know, been healthy and, you know, had a good year of tape to build on to kind of get into the off season. You know, this is really a make or break year for him, who's at the top of this depth chart. And I think is going to dictate a lot of how well this team is going to play on defense. Because I think you know what you've got in Oso Odighizuwa, but I think, you know, directly tied to the play of Mazi Smith is the inability of the Cowboys to stop the run. And I think if he's able to kind of step up and be that difference maker as a run defender, I think a lot of things kind of fall into place very nicely.
Yeah, and we talked about this when we were talking about like Tyler Guyton and Cooper Beebe, where if you just tell me how one player performs, I can probably tell you how the entire offense performed, right? If Guyton has a bad year, I have a hard time seeing the Cowboys being really good on offense. The same for Mazi Smith. If Mazi Smith has a down 2025 and, you know, he's just not playing up to the level that we even saw maybe at times last year, I just don't know if they've got the linebackers and the other guys on the defensive line to help out. But on the other side, Landon, if he turns into a first-round caliber player and he's playing the best football of his career, now I think we're having a different conversation about the defense entirely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, at times you saw a guy who was improving, who was getting better as the snaps are going on. It was hard to see because the football was really bad. But I think that he's not the only part of this defensive line room that that's going to get snaps that's incomplete. I feel like the other part of this is that the Cowboys are probably missing another defensive tackle, another nose tackle to come in. And we can talk about those guys a little bit later. But yep. I think that's the other part about this that really kind of feels incomplete is that I think what you have in Oso Odighizuwa. Well, let's talk about Solomon Thomas, who I think is a key acquisition. But I think on the other side, at the nose tackle side, you're still not sure what you're getting out of Mazi Smith, and you're probably still going to have another body to kind of get in there and rotate with him.
What does Mazi need to do this year to take that next step? Because I do think we saw flashes last year of him just being stronger and making plays in the backfield. We know that he's not going to be a pass rusher, but how does he become a more consistent and dependable player?
I think consistently, getting off the ball correctly, I think that was an issue very early on in his career that I think he's continued to get better at. But I think that it still continues to kind of be an issue at times, is that it's gotten from a bad situation to an inconsistent situation, which is, an improvement, but we still needed to go from inconsistent to, hey, maybe just every once in a while, he's the last guy off the ball, or what I'm saying, like we needed to go take another step in consistently appropriately getting off the ball. And I'm not asking him to beat Parsons or Osa like off the ball and get in and get the sack. I'm asking him to get off the ball in a timely manner so that he can get into proper position to use the strength that we know he has in his body. Because I think that's really been the issue, is that a lot of times you don't get to see how strong he is, because at the point of contact, at the time that the guards and centers are engaging him, he's in such bad body position because of the snap timing that he's getting blown off the ball at times.
All right, let's talk about Osa Odighizuwa, who the Cowboys paid a ton of money this offseason. And honestly, we were kind of surprised that they gave him an extension, not because we didn't want them to, just because we knew what the number was going to be. And it's a lot for a guy that we think has gotten better every single season, but it's not been a Pro Bowler yet. I think you and I are in agreement here. I don't want to speak for you that Osa's best football is still ahead of him. But how does he take that next step from an above average defensive tackle to a game-changing defensive tackle?
I mean, again, it's just like a lot of players on this defense just continue to be a better run defender. I think you've seen a guy, again, that grew up in the kind of Dan Quinn style, that was a one gapper, who's getting up the field, who's worried about rushing the passer. And we've seen him, continue to be near the top of the league in pressures for interior defensive players. And I think that aspect, he's shown you that he is a very good player as a pass rusher. I think where he needs to grow is to continue to be a versatile player and try to grow into being a better run defender, because I think the problem that this team has had is that they've got, Micah Parsons and Osa Odighizuwa, who are great at pass rushing, but they need them to be better run defenders so that they could stay on the field and not feel like this team's getting bullied up front and getting run all over and losing their own opportunities to be pass rushers because they're such, poor run defenders.
Yeah, and I think for Osa, we saw last year he finished number one, I believe, among all defensive tackles in QB hits, fourth in pass rush win rate. And those stats are just, they show you the consistency game in and game out. And I think I'm someone that believes sacks are overrated. They can be kind of noisy, but it would be nice to see him convert some more of those QB hits into sacks, because you convert 4 or more, you go from 6 sacks to 10 sacks, and we're just having a much different conversation. That he's not really any different of a player. He's just converting a couple more little plays here and there. I don't think he's that far away. I think the switch from from Dan Quinn to Mike Zimmer to Matt Eberflus is actually going to help him, because I think he's going to be able to just get up the field more. You're probably not going to see as many blitzes in Matt Eberflus's defense, which I would assume you're going to drop more guys into coverage, giving Osa a little bit more time to get to the quarterback. I expect a career year.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think if he does those two things that we just kind of prescribed, takes a step as a run defender, converts those pressures into sacks, you're talking about a guy who I think is likely to make a Pro Bowl.
Yeah, I think I'm really excited. He's one of these young players of the team that we talked about for a couple of weeks now. Like, if the Cowboys are going to go to the postseason and win, they need some of these other guys to step up outside of, Micah Parsons, CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott. Osa's already a good player, but can he take that step from good to great? We'll see. I'm very, very optimistic. Let's get to the key backups. And it's really just Solomon Thomas here. Like, that's the only guy that they have right now that you can count on.
It was funny that I was wondering why you put an S at the end of that, because you're right. It is just Solomon Thomas at this point. And as we kind of alluded to earlier, it does feel like this team is still one player away from, their heavy rotational defensive tackles, 4 that they would use. I think that there's likely that they'll have a 5th guy in there, but I think that potentially would be Toa, or maybe let's see how King Basode shows up, but we'll talk about those guys later. But Solomon Thomas right now is the only guy kind of coming in there as a consistent under tackle. And it, when he got signed, I actually thought that they might have used him a little bit more as an inside outside guy.